All right, here we go. Can MLS be kept? That let me fix that because it's spelled incorrectly. Sometimes typos are part of the story as well over here on Morning Kick Around. Can MLS become a top five league? Now, there's no timeline on this. Right? What's interesting about this conversation is that we're never like within 5 years or 10 years. Now, there was a point where Don Garber was putting a timeline. I believe people remember. Was it 2022? Was it 2022 that he was talking about MLS being a top five league in the world? All right, the reason this comes up, all right, this is just a standard question we get to ask as American soccer fans. We're always talking about our league. The reason this comes up is because I came across a clip over on YouTube from TalkSport. Now, TalkSport, first of all, are we really taking them seriously? That's all. I'll leave that up to you. I'll leave it up to you whether you take TalkSport seriously. I'm a guy who talks about soccer on the radio 3 hours a day, so I know what goes into that job. I'm not going to come down too hard on TalkSport, but I wanted to share this, and I've clipped this. This is not the whole video. It's not the whole video, but I want to clip this, and I'll give you some context. Nick Cushing, former NYCFC manager who had just left that club at the end of the 2024 season, he was on TalkSport talking about his career path, talking about being part of the city football group and things like that. And there were some questions then asked of Nick Cushing about Major League Soccer and about his time in it. So here we go. Let's see what was said about this idea of MLS as a top five league.
The league is developing, is definitely developing. Now, I understand the perception, and there is a perception that it is a retirement league. And the reality is there is still an element of that. Guys that have experienced the top five leagues in the world going over to MLS and playing at the tail end of their career. But, there are also incentives in your cap to have U22 players, to have young DPs, to go and get. And there's a lot of emerging talent from Eastern Europe, a lot of emerging talent from South America, but it is young talent that is probably not in the peak of their career. And, like Simon says, it's a part of their journey, and they are then transitioning across to Europe, to the top.
Okay, I'm going to pause it here just because I want to give a little bit more context. And again, you can go watch the whole video on YouTube. Go look for it. It's actually, let me see what the title is, because I want to make sure I give you the right place to go. But before Nick starts talking about what he's talking about, Simon Jordan, who is the man on the left with the blazer jacket, he talks about how he was surprised by how bad MLS is 17 years on from David Beckham. That he went and watched a game, or he was in America and he saw the league, and then he went back recently and he said it wasn't very good. And this kind of sparks this conversation about where MLS is and where MLS can be. So we've got Nick Cushing talking about what I was alluding to before earlier on the show, which is the gap between the top-end talent and some of the other talent that's in Major League Soccer, some of the other players.
Five leagues in the world. But,
sure,
in my time there from 2020 to 2024, the league, the playing style of teams, the level of players definitely improved.
I mean, in terms of impact, how big an impact do you think, Nick, the 2026 World Cup might have on the domestic league there?
I think that will be really interesting to see, because I think the initial impact will be commercial.
So, again, Nick Cushing is a guy, right now, I'm not sure Nick Cushing has any vested interest in being nice about Major League Soccer. That doesn't mean that he's being completely honest, right? It doesn't mean that he is giving his unvarnished opinion about the league, but he's not necessarily, having been dismissed by NYCFC, he's not necessarily a guy who has to, unless he is coveting another job in MLS, and that could certainly be possible, right? But for the moment, Nick Cushing is not a guy who is being paid by anybody in Major League Soccer or by anybody who has an interest in Major League Soccer. So he doesn't have to massage his opinion. He's just saying it's made progress, right? And again, he didn't say anything else about he didn't say it took massive leaps forward or that it's challenging any top five leagues, but there is this discussion. So right now we're listening to a discussion about the 2026 World Cup and the impact on Major League Soccer, but let's continue, because I want to get to the part about being a top five league.
Of the nature of America. But I do think that the aim for US soccer and for MLS in particular is to try and use the World Cup to accelerate the progress of the league. I think the cap will always be that one thing that
holds
stops
it
the
back,
league,
doesn't
that
it?
holds
Yeah.
it back. Because
I mean, their stated ambition from Don Gerber, who's the commissioner of the MLS, and his commercial counterpart, Dan Countermouch, is we want to be inside the top 5 leagues in world football. Now, I don't know how you're going to do that. You're not the NFL, right? You don't have the franchise.
That's what the Saudis are saying that.
But they will, but they're not being restricted by the finances. The Saudis are doing what they want economically, where the Americans, because of the model that they build, is they're capping the expenditure. Now, unless they're going to change that and...
All right, so he's going to get into a little bit more of his explanation of why he doesn't think MLS can be a top 5 league under the current structure. And there's certainly that is a very tough argument to counter when we talk about Major League Soccer. Right? So, Placata, not in its current form can MLS be a top 5 league. And that's because of the salary budget, more or less, right? You can argue about that the salary budget comes from single entity, or it's born out of X, Y, or Z, or a conservative ownership base, or whatever it is, right? Self-imposed restrictions. Thank you, Mike Thomas. Absolutely. Self-imposed restriction. Major League Soccer has an ethos, or has a plan that is built around the idea of we're not going to be too risky with our spending. Because if we take all of the restrictions off, then we could end up being, and I know that it doesn't feel like here in 2025, after the league's been around since 1996, we're approaching 30 years of Major League Soccer, it doesn't feel like the cautionary tale of the NASL 1.0 should matter anymore. Right? It doesn't feel like you should be pointing at that league from the 70s and 80s and going, well, that's why we have a salary budget, and we're never going to take it away because we don't want to be the NASL. Now, it's also worth pointing out that as the world changes, there is movement towards what MLS is. Now, MLS didn't obviously invent the idea of a salary cap. Major League Soccer just following the footsteps of other American sports leagues. Now, the problem for Major League Soccer, of course, has always been that MLS exists in an ecosystem that includes all these other leagues, all these other countries, all these other levels of the sport, something the NFL never had to deal with. The NFL can say, let's put a salary budget on our teams, and it won't matter because there's only one major professional American football league. They're not competing against anybody for players. There's only one place to go if you're a professional football player. It's similar to the NBA, although there are a little bit better options for basketball players than American football players. But this is the idea. Okay, so the idea is, from Simon Jordan, you cannot be top 5 if you have a salary budget. And that's the crux of this question. Can you find a way to break into top 5 without getting rid of your salary budget?
Change their approach to it. There is no chance that the MLS is going to be a major league in world football. No chance. No chance.
All right, so there you go. I mean, that's... I don't think you can say, well, that's completely wrong. Right? I don't think based on what the current situation is and the path that Major League Soccer has been on, that you can say, well, that's an insane thing to say, that it will never be top 5. But a lot of things would have to happen in order for MLS to break into the top 5. And by the way, I'm not even sure that being top 5 matters all that much for Major League Soccer. Now, we just have this natural inclination. I mean, the American ideal is always to be the best, to be bigger, to continue to grow. Right? I talked earlier about capitalism and business and all those things, and how businesses always act in their own best interest. And the idea is almost always that if you're not growing, you're dying. Right? There are maybe some small businesses who find their niche and I got a coffee shop, or I got a bookstore, or I make, empanadas, or whatever it is. And hey, we're happy with our business. We've got one location, or we've got a food truck, or whatever it is. I don't know why I'm specifically talking about food. Maybe I'm hungry. But there are those businesses that exist. But generally speaking, what are people who run businesses trying to do? They're trying to grow. They're trying to expand at always. Right? That's the dream, because then you are, well, if you own the business, then you are wealthy. In the case of Major League Soccer, it has always been a driving force. They want to grow. Now, they've always been very careful about how they grow, but they want to grow. Now, again, how you do that in America is different than how you would do it almost anywhere else in the world. And these are not excuses for how Major League Soccer does their business. Jason says MLS sells experience, is not trying to sell soccer. I think that is extremely generalized in terms of how you should view MLS. MLS is not so focused on putting the absolute best product on the field. Or rather, again, okay, this is another part of this, right? When we talk about soccer in America, professional soccer in America, now, if you are a fan of lower division soccer or you want to see an integrated pyramid, okay, we acknowledge you, and we're going to put you over here for a second because, again, the biggest league, the strongest league, the wealthiest league is Major League Soccer. That's undeniable. We don't talk about individual clubs and then come back around to the league the way you would with the or La Liga or any of those other, right? You don't say La Liga is doing X and Y, generally speaking, unless it's about television rights. But you don't talk about the league dictating things about how any of that operates. The La Liga does have spending rules, which are coming down on clubs like Barcelona and those kind of things. And those things are happening. But it's always like the clubs are the drivers of the growth, if there is any, for any given league. That's not how Major League Soccer works. It never has. And really, that's not how any American pro sports league works, outside of maybe Major League Baseball, because it existed sort of prior to this idea that the league comes first and then you populate it with clubs. Right? That's Major League Soccer is the business entity that we focus on first. And then everything is sort of from MLS and trickling down. And that is, again, I think it's a fundamental difference, not just in terms of organization, but in terms of how it operates. So when we talk about whether MLS can become a top 5 league, it is so fundamentally different in terms of how it views that idea that I don't even know if it's worth asking. So when we talk about the top 5 leagues in the world, what are we talking about? We're talking about money, right? We're talking about money. And then when you get granular, when you talk about the individual leagues, and you get into La Liga is this, and the Bundesliga is that, and the Premier League is the other thing. Don't lie to yourself. If you talk about La Liga, you're going 3 or 4 clubs down the list before you're like, okay, whatever. Now, when we talk about the league strength, you may be wise enough to incorporate Celta Vigo into your perception of La Liga, but that's not what most people think of. Most people are just thinking Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, maybe Bilbao, maybe 1 or 2 other teams. Sevilla, okay. And the Premier League, maybe it's a little bit different because the Premier League has done such an incredible job of marketing itself around the world. And the money that comes in means that the clubs in the bottom end of the Premier League are wealthier than all but the top couple of clubs in those other 4 major leagues. Can MLS be a top 5 league? Depends on what you mean by that. In terms of the money it brings in? Well, that's not what, if you're a soccer fan, that's not what you care about. In terms of the quality of the play? Well, there are some things working against MLS that probably will always prevent it from entering that echelon. Number 1, it's locked out of the biggest club competition on the planet. Major League Soccer can do nothing about where it's located. It can't change its location. It can't get into UEFA. The word Europe is right there in the name. So what is Major League Soccer going to do? I mean, again, these are not excuses. It's just, again, to mention here that it is a fundamentally different idea of what even top means. Because MLS is playing a different game from a business perspective than any of those leagues in Europe that get mentioned in the top 5. Marketing is not the measure of whether a league is top 5. Not for us, not for soccer fans. When we talk about top 5, what we mean is the best talent in the world, some of it anyway, plays in this league. In the world. And it becomes a league Garber loved to say this too, a league of choice. It's a league of choice. The league wants to be attractive to those kinds of players. But, again, it's locked down to the biggest club competition on the planet. It is, even if they took off the training wheels and let clubs spend, they wouldn't be spending $50 million on players. That would be ridiculous because the revenues aren't there. There may be a crazy owner here or there, but again, that's what we're talking about with NASL 1.0. Try not to become that league. All right. Let's pause. Take a little bit of a breath. Again, support the show. Subscribe. Help us out on the way to 1K. You can buy us a coffee over at coffee.com/morningkicker right there on the screen, no matter how you say it. Support the show, or follow the show, rather, on social media. MKickaround, Instagram, Blue Sky, X. You can reach out via email at Gmail, morningkickaround@gmail.com.